go ahead and get started. We've got kind of a packed agenda today, so we want to get started on that. Want to welcome Speaker Pro Tem Carpenter here, joining us in lieu of Representative Mon today. Thank you, sir. With that in mind, we're going to go ahead and open the hearing on House Bill 2350 and ask Natalie to give us an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2350 creates the crimes of human smuggling and aggravated human smuggling, and it provides criminal penalties for violation of those crimes. The bill creates a new section of law that would provide that human smuggling is transporting, harboring, or concealing an individual into or within Kansas who the person knows or should have known is entering into or remaining in the United States illegally. Aggravated human smuggling would be human smuggling that is committed with a deadly weapon, causes bodily harm, great bodily harm, or disfigurement to the individual being smuggled, or causes the individual being smuggled to become a victim of a sex offense. Human smuggling would be a severity level 5-person felony, and aggravated human smuggling would be a severity level 3-person felony. And I can take any questions.
Representative Eric Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Scott, when it comes to lesser included offenses, aggravated human smuggling, how does kidnapping fit in with that and associated crimes?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Smith, kidnapping has a few distinct elements, one of which is a force requirement, and that's the same for human trafficking. So you have both of those offenses require some type of force on the person committing the offense. And so, it's just kind of there's a different element there that the prosecutor would have to prove. Whereas this could be voluntarily. I mean, I could say, Representative Smith, will you please smuggle me into the United States? I would pay you for that. And so I'm a participant in that. You're not forcing me, but you would still be violating this offense.
Right, and that's why I pointed toward distinctly the aggravated human smuggling, which has the air of kidnapping when you're using force or a weapon is involved. Deadly force. So that's where I'm trying to figure out which would be the lesser included offense of the two, or if either qualifies.
Well, so with aggravated human smuggling, you still don't have a force requirement necessarily. So say you were smuggling me and we got into an accident and I was gravely injured. So that would meet the definition of aggravated human smuggling because I did there was bodily harm caused to me during that course of that, even though you weren't forceful with me, you weren't the one who necessarily inflicted the bodily harm onto me.
I apologize. I think I get what you're saying now. One is intentional and the other may just be purely accidental, but because of the nature of it, it causes the harm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Representative Heiberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a hypothetical. If a governor of another state filled a bus full of people who he knew to be in the country without documentation and drove that bus to or through Kansas, would the statute apply?
I believe it would, so long as the person who is transporting that person into or within Kansas knows that those folks are in the United States illegally, then yes, I believe it would apply.
Representative Pressman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the person who's being transported, could they be charged with a crime? Could they charged with this?
No, the person being smuggled would not necessarily be charged with this crime. Obviously there could be some ramifications if someone were to be caught smuggling them. That person would be arrested. I suspect that would cause law enforcement to then take the person being smuggled into custody since they're not here legally, and then perhaps be deported. But they would not be charged with this crime.
Representative Turk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to the representative's question and query about the busload of, are they still in the country illegally if they've already been processed and are awaiting hearing? At that point, isn't that a gray area?
Mr. Chairman, so that would all have to come out at trial, right? Because one of the things that the prosecutor is going to have to prove in order to obtain this conviction is that the person knows or should have known that the individual was entering into or remaining in the United States illegally. So that's an element of this offense. And so, you know, whatever hypothetical scenario would happen with the busload of people, it would have to be proven at trial that they were here illegally in order to obtain this conviction.
Further questions, committee. Representative Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is it the intent of this bill it only applies to, say, people from another country that are illegally in the United States? Because it mentions, I don't know what else is on the books, like for a sex trafficking crime, but if a resident of Kansas is moving intra-state in some sort of sex trafficking, they would not be subject to this bill. Is that first question, and then is that the intent?
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Titus, first of all, the intent question would maybe be better addressed to the proponents, because I'm not, can't really say exactly what they intend here. But I want to try to understand your question on sex trafficking. So, if a person is being transported and they're in the United States illegally, is that what you're asking?
Legally in the United States.
Okay, so then this crime wouldn't necessarily apply, because you have to be transporting, harboring, or concealing an individual who you know or should have known is entering into or remaining in the United States illegally.
So whether you're a resident in Nebraska or Kansas, this would not apply.
Right.
Are there other statutes that would cover that in Kansas law, especially for an in-state movement?
So we have human trafficking on the books. We also have kidnapping. So depending on the certain circumstances, that conduct would likely fall under one of those. Our human trafficking statutes cover both sex trafficking and labor trafficking. So
I just want to make sure I understood the scope. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Further questions, committee? All right, seeing none, thank you, Natalie. We now have for proponents, Representative Carrie Barth from the 5th District. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you very much. I'm Representative Carrie Barth for House District 5. Thank you guys so much for having me today. So Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, and minority chairs, and the rest of the committee. I'm really excited about this HB 2350. Last year, when I was running my campaign, I came across this was a need that we have, that there is no law in the state of Kansas for human smuggling. And my jaw kind of dropped and hit the floor at that time, as I was pretty surprised. I thought, well, surely we have something that says you can't do this. And we don't. So that's why we put this bill together. And it came about from Sheriff Jeff Richards, who's here today to provide testimony as well. Both Rebecca Schmoy, Representative Schmoy, and I have worked on this bill together since last year. And when we recognized that there was an issue, Jeff Richards, the sheriff that's from Franklin County, made us aware of it, as Franklin County has I-35, which is a gateway for where human trafficking and human smuggling and all kinds of things happen through I-35. And it's not the only place that it happens in the state of Kansas, but he's the one who brought it to our attention that this is an issue, and he will go into more detail about the experiences that he has had. Also became an issue, or known to me too, when I had followed along and saw that our U.S. Senator, Roger Marshall, Dr. Roger Marshall, was down at the border as well. And Jeff Richards went with him, the sheriff did as well. And that was another place he got to see some of it firsthand happening with the smuggling as well. So this will address the fact that there is no law at this point in time. And it is specific to crimes of human smuggling and aggravated. It's just pretty basic from that standpoint. We took the law, working with the revisor, basing this off of Florida, Texas, and Arizona's law. So there is current law against human smuggling. I think what we did took the best of all three worlds and made it better for Kansas for our protection. We do realize that There was some back and forth on this. This is something that we've worked pretty hard on with a revisor, with the district attorney that's in Franklin County as well as Sheriff Jeff Richards. We've worked also with other proponents that are here, as well as ones that have written as well, just to make sure that the wording on here was clear and concise. That would make it so that folks, when they are caught and can have a successful trial, for them to be able to prosecute. And from the proponent standpoint that we have too, just to give you an idea of who we have worked with, I know some are here. We have support from District Attorneys Association. We've got KBI here as well. We've got the Association of Chiefs of Police, the sheriffs, the peace officers. We've also been in contact with several different folks that are responsible for human trafficking boards as well that are in support of this. We've also been in contact with the U.S. Congressman Jake LaTurner, Tracy Mann, Ron Estes, and Roger Marshall as well. I've also been in contact with the Kansas Turnpike, with the Kansas Highway Patrol. I've also been in touch with Homeland Security, the Kansas-based ones who've actually provided me with the contact information and forwarded my information over to the DC headquarters. And it was surprising, but less than 30 minutes after the email was sent, I actually received a call from the DC headquarters. This is a known issue across the state. This is not just something Kansas, but we have border states as well where we are used as a transport through and within. So we wanted to make sure that it covers all of those things that we are seeing. This applies to multiple populations of people. It's not specific to certain types of people either. So I think it's good to know that we have some dangerous things happening and potentially bad things could happen, that we have the ability through this law to help. So with the folks that I talked with the Homeland Security, one of the things we even talked about is just getting together, assuming that this passes committee and assuming this passes the House and the Senate and is signed into law by the governor, then we would love to have an opportunity to bring everybody together after the fact as well, if almost like a kind of a forum and a task force. There's a lot of other different associations and not-for-profits that help people that are in these types of situations as well, as there is a component that we could also additionally help them, get out of the situation as well. So anyway, that's my testimony. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And I will stand for questions if you have any later.
Representative Heiberger has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here. I certainly understand some of the concerns around human smuggling, but it seems like it's drafted pretty broadly. And it says human smuggling is transporting, harboring, or concealing an individual into or within Kansas who the person knows or should have known is entering into the United States illegally. So I guess the way I read this, somebody who's renting an apartment to somebody who he's pretty sure might be an undocumented immigrant is committing a level 5 person felony. Is that the intent of this law?
So I would say that's not, well, and I'm not an attorney on this side of things, so the district attorney's office, as well as a revisor, I probably would also ask them, but the intent is really for folks that are doing this, I think, almost like a business, as on purpose. They're doing this as something that they're repeating, and that it's offered as a service to be able to smuggle humans.
I guess transportation is your biggest concern. Is that accurate or not?
The transportation of getting them.
Is that your biggest concern, or am I hearing that wrong? So is that your biggest concern, or am I hearing that wrong?
The transportation is a piece of the puzzle. In addition, there is harboring that happens as well of these humans that are being smuggled.
Additional questions for Representative Barth. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Immediately adjacent to my district, there are several faith-based shelters for people who are homeless, displaced for a whole number of reasons. Would you want to see these faith-based organizations prosecuted under this law for harboring people who are illegally within the country when they're providing a roof over their heads in cold weather?
I would say the intent of that is not for folks that are trying to keep people from other types of smuggling or trafficking of individuals.
Additional questions? All right. Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Now we're pleased to hear from Representative Rebecca Schmoy, 59th District. Welcome to committee.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Representative Barth and I have been working on this for a long time now, and we've been talking to a lot of people. We've been getting a lot of input about what is actually happening and how we can address these things. I'm going to read so that I don't squirrel, because that's a very real possibility because of the amount of information that we have received while we have been doing research on this. We do have other proponents here that will be able to cover some of the more specific and in-depth. We have an opportunity before us to not only protect Kansas citizens, but our members of law enforcement, and take a much-needed step in holding people accountable for their role in victimizing those who are being smuggled into and through Kansas. Some of these people being smuggled are promised opportunities for a better life, when in reality, they are oftentimes being lied to, threatened, and abused, and some result in deadly consequences as their smuggler moves them from point A to wherever it is that they determine point B is going to be. This is a known loophole in our current law. The other proponents today will address that. As you are listening to the other conferees, I would like for you to keep in mind that if the smuggler were moving drugs, they could be held accountable. However, since they are moving human beings instead of drugs, they are released without consequence. Committee, I know that you and I, even if we disagree on other policies and politics, we can agree that people, human beings, are far more valuable than drugs. The fact that we can hold someone accountable for smuggling drugs, but not people, is egregious. And I look forward to working with you to shore up this law in order to protect our communities and our fellow man while we hold those endangered in the act of smuggling humans accountable. Thank you, and I will stand for questions.
Committee questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll now hear from Robert Jacobs, Executive Officer, Kansas Bureau of Investigation.
Good afternoon, Chairman Owens, members of the committee. My name is Robert Jacobs. I'm the Executive Officer at the KPI. I appreciate the opportunity to come and provide testimony on behalf of House Bill 2350. We do believe that this bill will fill a gap in Kansas law, and specifically when we look at human trafficking and human smuggling, the big difference here, and it's already been mentioned to some degree, is the issue of consent. When we look at human trafficking, the definition there under KSA 2154-26 says human trafficking is the intentional recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purposes of subjecting the person to involuntary servitude or forced labor. When we look at this human smuggling, most often these are occurring in a consensual situation, and that is the gap that we're talking about. I think that, so we would support this bill. I think that the other issue that, that the bill does need, and we've talked about this, I spoke with Representative Barth about this, and I think it's something for the committee to consider, is some additional language in there that does address intent. Under the human trafficking law, it is the intentional recruitment. I think that language needs to be considered here for exactly the scenarios that have already been brought up this morning, or I'm sorry, this afternoon. So with that, I will stand for questions.
All right, thank you very much, sir. Committee questions? All right, thank you very much. All right, now we'll hear from Jeff Richards, Franklin County Sheriff. Looks like on behalf of the Kansas Sheriff's Association, Kansas Peace Officers Association, and the Chiefs of Police.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I am Jeff Richards, and I serve as a sheriff in Franklin County. And like Representative Schmoy, I'm going to not try to insult you by reading, but if I don't, then I'll go down too many rabbit holes myself. So I will read here. This afternoon, I'm testifying in support of House Bill 2350 on behalf of the Kansas Sheriff's Association, Kansas Peace Officers Association, as well as the Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police. And I do appreciate the opportunity to be here today. As each of you know, as has been mentioned, we do already in Kansas have a statute, which was referenced already, 215426, which does create the crime of human trafficking. And, but however, there is a gap in this law that I believe we need to address, and that's the circumstances of human smuggling. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Immigration and Customs Enforcement explains the difference between trafficking and smuggling like this. It says human trafficking involves the exploiting of men, women, or children for the purposes of forced labor or commercial sexual exploitation. Human smuggling involves the provision of a service, typically transportation or fraudulent documents, to an individual who voluntarily seeks to gain illegal entry into a foreign country. The U.S. State Department and the United Nations also have similar definitions of trafficking and smuggling. But to put it more simply, human trafficking goes against the known will or consent of the individual being trafficked, and that's why our statute reads through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of being trafficked, and that person is subject to involuntary servitude or forced labor, whereas human smuggling does involve the consent of the person being smuggled. Oftentimes, the person being smuggled has made a significant financial payment to the smuggler or a smuggling organization. And even with this distinct difference, there are similarities which demand that we take action to protect those being smuggled as well as our communities. And the best way that I can emphasize this is to highlight a couple cases that we have worked in Franklin County. The first case involves a business which does have 2 locations in Franklin County and locations in at least 2 other Kansas counties. Most of the workers in the business they did enter the United States unlawfully through the use of coyotes. And these individuals made payment to a cartel in Mexico for their safe passage into the United States. Once in our country, they were hidden in stash houses or flop houses, and they have described the conditions in those houses as deplorable. There's typically a large number of people in those houses with limited food and water, and generally only one working bathroom if there is a bathroom that is provided. They can stay there anywhere from overnight to several weeks, and this is based off of people that we have actually interviewed ourselves in Franklin County. These people have explained to us that they were moved from location to location, being concealed in vehicles. And we were told that during their journey to Kansas, they themselves and they also witnessed mistreatment by the smugglers. And those range anywhere from food and water deprivation, physical abuse, rape, and sometimes even murder. When they arrived at their destination, they met with representatives from the business. They were provided with employment documents, a work schedule, and a place to live. Now, they are required to live in that house that is provided by the business, and they pay rent to someone at the business to stay there. Although they are paid for the work they provide, the pay rate is typically not the same as an American citizen would be paid, and the cost of the rent is typically higher than most people would want to pay. The work schedule is usually 6 or 7 days a week, and the workers I interviewed do not consider themselves to be victims in any way because they understood the working arrangements prior to their arrival. I believe that the business owner is taking great advantage of these people and is using this loophole in the law to do so. Another case that we had involves a vehicle pursuit, which originated a couple counties away from us in Lyon County, ended up terminating in Franklin County. The driver of that fleeing vehicle was transporting several individuals from multiple countries that were being smuggled to various locations across the United States. At one point during the pursuit, the driver did slow down enough to allow the individuals the opportunity to flee from the vehicle. The pursuit did continue, and it ended when the driver intentionally crashed head-on into one of my deputies. After the crash, the smuggler carjacked another vehicle by forcing the driver out with a weapon. That incident was resolved and the driver eventually taken into custody, and she has since been convicted of several crimes and has been sentenced to prison. And this is just one example of what we have seen across the nation with the actions taken by the smugglers. And the smugglers typically have no concern for the people that they are smuggling because they just consider them to be cargo and a means of a paycheck. Smugglers will go to great lengths to avoid law enforcement. And I do have other stories I could share, and I'm sure most law enforcement people can as well. But the purpose in sharing these two is simply to point out that this is not just a border problem. This is a problem that happens here in Kansas as well. As has been pointed out, we do have some major corridors that go through our state that are oftentimes used by these smuggling organizations. Human smuggling not only endangers the lives of those being smuggled, but also poses a danger to the citizens of our communities and our state. I want to encourage each of you to support this bill, not because Kansas law enforcement supports it, but because it is good legislation. This sends a message that Kansans place a high value on the dignity of human life and that all people deserve to be protected. I thank each of you for your time, and I will answer any questions you may have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Sheriff. Do you share the same concerns that the KBI shared a little bit ago about this being too broad? As I read through this, I mean, I know one individual I've given a ride to who was illegally here in the country, and I knew it. And in theory, at least the way I read it, I could be pulled over and arrested with a felony for giving him a ride to the grocery store. Do you agree that maybe we could work on and tighten up some of this language?
I do see the point that is in that I believe that oftentimes we have other statutes that say if that person financially benefits or something like that, for that I can see that provision there. Also, there's been a question about bus loads and different things like that. I would just point out to the committee from a law enforcement perspective, once a person is processed in at the border, even though they are released into the interior of the United States, even though they are here unlawfully, they technically do have a legal status at that point. And so I do not believe that this statute, from a practitioner perspective, would apply in that situation.
All right, thank you very much. Representative Heiberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that clarification. I guess I was referring to a situation where not asylum seekers, but people who were on the street and were undocumented and were put on a bus. I don't know that that's happening, but I apologize. I don't have the definition of human trafficking in front of me, but the first scenario you gave sounded like it's, if not human trafficking, really close. Did that not fit the definition?
The situation with the business? The difference on that is that there has to be force, fraud, or coercion, and these people actually paid to get here and to have the opportunity to do that. So it does not technically fit the definition of human trafficking because of their consent.
Representative Eric Smith. Nope. All right. Further questions? All right. Seeing none. Thank you very much. All right, committee, we have written proponent testimony from Brandon Jones, County Attorney of Franklin County Attorney's Office, as well as John Olsey, Executive Director, Hope Ranch for Women. Any other proponent testimony? All right, and I don't see any neutral testimony. We do have opponent testimony from Jennifer Roth on behalf of the State Board of Indigent Defense Services Legislative Committee. Jennifer, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Sorry, I brought my phone. In my haste, I did not print off my testimony, so I took pictures of it. I am here today on behalf of the BIDS Legislative Committee. And to summarize in advance our position, it is basically that if you make the policy choice to make this a state crime, that you tailor the language while you do that. I feel like we make it pretty clear, and I've heard some questions and some examples from members of the committee already that sort of embrace the examples that we were trying to give in our testimony. I appreciate that the proponents have met and talked to so many people and looked at so many examples, and it is tough to draft a narrowly tailored criminal statute, and so I do believe that there's some more work that needs to be done with that. Just so you know, which you probably already do, it is already a federal crime to bring in and harbor certain aliens. That's covered by 8 U.S.C. 1324. I am not an immigration attorney and I'm not a federal practitioner, but I did glance at this statute, and it is much longer than what is before you. It is tailored as far as the circumstances by which what constitutes bringing in and harboring. It also, I noticed, gives some exceptions about conduct that's not covered, and I saw one in there about churches. So that might be, I guess when I'm telling you that for two reasons. Number one, these folks could get charged in federal court with this federal offense. And also that if you move forward on making this a state crime, that you could look to the federal statute for examples for language. Just a couple other points. Immigration's very complicated area of law. There's a special court that decides those cases. There are law firms that are that's all they do. In fact, our agency, we don't move forward on certain things involving our clients until we talk to a special immigration attorney, because it is so specialized and the consequences are so, can be so grave. So it's very specialized. And so my concern, in addition to the language problems, my concern is that even though I don't have the stats or the studies with me, we know that when people are arrested, even if they're never charged with an offense or convicted, but even if you're arrested for something like this, like taking somebody to the grocery store or providing them shelter, even if you're arrested for that and never charged or convicted, having an arrest for something that was vague, or maybe the arresting person didn't quite know what the law was, that can have a lot of consequences on a person. So I'm just concerned, even if a person's not charged or convicted, that they still could face arrest for this crime that's so broadly worded at this time. So that's those are the things I just wanted to touch on. And but I'm happy to answer any questions, especially if you had ones about is this covered by a different crime or lesser includeds or that sort of a thing. So thank you for your time, and thank you for considering our concerns, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Roth. Committee, are there any questions? All right, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I could ask that Jeff Richards returns back, I believe Representative Eric Smith has a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Sheriff. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, in considering the conversation about how we further define this, it seems to me, and I'd be would welcome a chance to work with you all on getting this language put in there somehow, defining human trafficking within the language, but also some type of definition of an indentured servitude. And I think on the broad scale that may capture what we're going after for intent, but you know, if that, is that something that sounds close?
Yes, sir. I believe that that definition actually already exists in our human trafficking statute currently.
The indentured servitude portion?
Correct.
So is that under 5426?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, is there any additional opponent testimony on this bill? All right, seeing none, no further testimony, we'll go ahead and close the hearing on House Bill 2350. And we'll move into the hearing on House Bill 2328. And we'll ask Natalie to give us an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2328 excludes tests to detect the presence of fentanyl, ketamine, or GHB in a substance from the definition of drug paraphernalia. The bill amends KSA 215701, which is the statute that provides the definitions for use in the drug crimes article in the criminal code, to provide that any material that's used or intended for use to test a substance for the presence of fentanyl, a fentanyl analog, ketamine, or gamma Robert Jacobs from the KBI can correct me on how to say the last of that, but the drug that's commonly referred to as GHB are not considered drug paraphernalia. And essentially what those changes would lead to is that those tests would then be excluded from the criminal penalties for possession of drug paraphernalia and distribution of drug paraphernalia. And I can take any questions.
Well, thank you. Is possession of drug paraphernalia a Class B misdemeanor?
Oh, gosh. Mr. Chairman, so the general rule on possession is that it's actually a felony. It's a drug severity level 5.
Okay. Okay.
There's an exception for some certain marijuana drug paraphernalia, but that wouldn't apply in this case.
Okay, very good. Committee questions for Natalie. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pardon me. I just want to make sure I understand. This bill says possession of the test strips or whatever is necessary to detect the presence of these controlled substances would no longer be a violation of the law, but possession of the substances themselves would remain a violation of the law, I guess to the extent kratom is or is not, I don't even know. But the point of it is, this only legalizes the testing strips, not the actual drug, if you will.
That is correct. So essentially, this just excludes those tests from paraphernalia. The drug itself would be possession of a controlled substance, which is over in 5706. So this bill makes no changes to the illegality of possessing those controlled substances.
I'm having a hard time figuring out why it should be against the law to have the strips to let you know if what you have is against the law so that you won't have it anymore. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further questions, committee? All right, thank you very much. All right, we'll now be pleased to hear from our proponents on this bill. First up is Michelle Ponce, Associate Director, Association of Community Mental Health Centers of Kansas.
Good afternoon, Chair Owens, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 2328. My name is Michelle Ponce. I'm with the Association of Community Mental Health Centers. We represent all 26 community mental health centers across the state who provide services in every county 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, regardless of ability to pay. Over the last few years, deaths related to synthetic opioids continue to rise. That includes fentanyl. We frequently hear stories of individuals overdosing, thinking they were taking one drug when in fact fentanyl or another synthetic opioid was what they were actually ingesting. According to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, fentanyl is 50 to 100 times more powerful than morphine. In fact, even a very minute amount of fentanyl can be fatal. We look at this through the lens of prevention and that we must employ a variety of strategies to decrease the risk of overdose deaths. The use of fentanyl strips has been shown to be effective in detecting even trace amounts of fentanyl. The strips are easy to use, low cost, and easily acceptable. I've been told that you can even purchase them off Amazon. In summary, we think that prevention should be a key component of our behavioral health strategy for the state of Kansas, and we believe that House Bill 2328 is a step in the right direction. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. We'll go ahead and go through the proponents first, and then we'll see if the committee has questions. Thank you. All right, now we'll hear from Paula Mitchell, victim advocate from Bright House.
Chairman, for having me here. I am Paula Mitchell. I'm from Bright House. It's a domestic violence sexual assault center. We cover Rice, Kingman, Harper, and Reno County. I'm here to ask you guys to think about if your daughter or granddaughter at 16 through 20 years old when I'm telling this story. When I was in my second year of college, our basketball team just won against our biggest rival. It was so exciting. And my friends decided to go out and go to a celebration party. I drove because I didn't drink. And so we're sitting at this party, and I had my Dr. Pepper, and the gentleman of the house that we're at walks over to me and asked me if I want something to drink. I was like, sure. Can I have a Dr. Pepper or water? That'd be great. So he goes to the kitchen, comes back with a can of Dr. Pepper, and I didn't realize it had already been opened. So I sat there and I drank that Dr. Pepper. I got halfway through that can and I started feeling funny. And so I walked into the bathroom, put some water on my face, hoping that I would feel better. I didn't. I opened the door, and there he stood. I'm like, I need to leave. I'm not feeling well. I need to go. He's like, well, your friends are having so much fun. We're not using that back room back there. Why don't you go lay down for a little bit? You'll feel better. Everything will be fine. I'm like, okay. I'm 19 years old. Sure, why not? So I went and laid down, and my body started feeling really heavy, where I couldn't move. I would look around the room, and it'd be like a blur, like you'd see on TV. When I came back to, there were 4 of the basketball guys on top of me. They had put the date-rape drug in my Dr. Pepper. I had one guy sitting by my head, patting my head, saying, oh, it'll be over in just a little bit. You'll be okay. Don't know how long that went. I was going in and out of consciousness from that drug. I couldn't resist him. I couldn't scream. I couldn't do anything because of that drug. Jump forward to 2 weeks ago. My 21-year-old was having a birthday. Mom, can you drive us to the club so that we have a designated driver? I'm like, sure, thanks. I would love to go with you guys. I took her and 3 of her friends to the club. We're sitting there. We decided to get up and dance. I'm standing watching our drinks while the girls are dancing, and I see a guy come over and put something in every single one of the girls' drinks. So as we're coming off that dance floor, I tell the girls, don't drink anything. Don't touch it, nothing. So we go over and sit down, and I act like I take a huge drink of my drink, and almost immediately, that guy was at our table, hanging on us, over us, and if I wouldn't have stopped those girls from drinking their drinks, they could have ended up just like I did 20, 30 years ago. But if we would legalize those test strips, it would save a lot of girls from being raped from this drug, from the drugs. As an advocate, I have 4 16-year-old girls that I am working with that have been raped because of having the rape drug in their drinks. So this has gone on for decades. And so I ask you to help give them something to protect themselves, because I didn't have anything. And I think they deserve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. All right, committee. We'll now hear from Erica Holliday, Substance Use Coordinator, Unified Government of Wyandotte County Public Health Department. Welcome to committee, Erica.
Thank you for having me. So again, my name's Erica Holiday. I'm the Substance Use Coordinator at the Wyandotte County Health Department. I started working in substance use in 2015, and ironically enough, that is the year when fentanyl really hit the drug scene. I worked with people who use heroin and meth specifically, and all of my coworkers who had been in this field for years were saying, we've never seen anything like this before. People's behaviors are more erratic than usual. Their ability to decipher right and wrong is just out the door, and it's killing people faster than we've ever seen in history. So fentanyl has increased being around in the lives of people with substance use disorder, and also thus working in the field ever since. And at first it was just people who had opioids such as heroin as their drug of choice, which of course is extremely concerning, but it was for us working in the public health, prevention and recovery area, we could track this group. We could figure out who has heroin as a drug of choice. We could warn them about fentanyl. We could equip them with things like Narcan to keep them safe and go from there. The dynamic has changed where fentanyl is found. Now we see it located in stimulants such as meth and cocaine just as much. And people who have been using stimulants for first time or ever years, is everything okay? Oh. All right.
Yeah, I just thought
Enunciate.
you stand up a little bit straighter. I saw you kind of crouched over trying to talk and trying to make things a little bit better for you.
Okay, people can still hear me this way?
You're good.
All right, first time doing this. Thanks, guys.
Oh, that's good.
All right, so fentanyls and stimulants now. And folks who are addicted to stimulants, meth, and cocaine, they don't usually need to worry about overdose. That's not something that comes from stimulant use. Now that fentanyl's being found in this drug supply, they don't really know what to expect. I've worked in states where fentanyl test strips are legal, are permitted for use, and I had folks come into my office absolutely terrified, begging for this resource because they don't know what they're at risk for anymore. Not only that, in Wyandotte County, we've been seeing a much higher overdose rate amongst youth, and that's because of fentanyl showing up in our counterfeit pill supply. All right, teens have been experimenting with drugs for 10, 20, 30 years plus. That's not anything new. What is new is that now what's being found in this drug supply could kill them immediately, and it is. Okay, in Wyandotte County, we've seen drug overdoses increase by 146% since 2020. That is directly related to fentanyl having presence in this. Easy access to fentanyl test strips would not only allow people to check what they're using, make sure it's safe, it would open up the door to recovery because we cannot save people, we cannot get them to recovery if they've already died. And it would be a lesson for if people know that if people are able to check if what they're using, even if they just use once, could kill them, and it tell them Zach positive, that's going to tell them something. This is extremely risky use, and it's going to be hopefully a change in behavior in the future. So in conclusion, I mean, fentanyl test strips are an important step to giving people a chance to enter into recovery, stay long-term, and will save them from ideally dying prematurely. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Erica. Now be pleased to hear from Libby Davis, RN, MSN from Cooper Davis Memorial Foundation. Welcome to the committee, Libby.
Thank you for having me. My name's Libby Davis. I'm here to basically share my story of my 16-year-old son who was poisoned by half of a fake pill containing illicit fentanyl almost 18 months ago. Over these past 18 months, I've come to learn more about fentanyl than I ever wanted to. I am a nurse. My husband's a nurse anesthetist. He provides pharmaceutical fentanyl every day he goes to work. Illicit fentanyl is a whole new ballgame. And despite the DEA's efforts to stop illicit fentanyl from coming into our country, we have to find another way to save the lives of Kansans and Americans. If we can't stop it from coming in, we must use every harm reduction tool available to us. Fentanyl testing strips is one of those. Kansans currently have access to a reactive harm reduction tool in Narcan. So anyone can go to a pharmacy and purchase Narcan and try to save a life in the event of an overdose. But for some reason, to be more proactive and have fentanyl testing strips available, that is considered illegal. Studies have shown that they are very effective and that 81% in a particular study that had access to the testing strips routinely tested their drugs and were 5 times more likely to change their drug use behavior. Availability of the testing strips will only increase awareness around the fentanyl crisis in our country. And the reality is that addiction is a disease of the brain. It's just like cancer or diabetes or Alzheimer's. The other reality is that you sometimes can't take the curiosity out of teenagers. Their brains are not fully developed. Sometimes they're not developed until the age of 28. So I couldn't figure out how to take the curiosity out of my kid. And I would love to know if any of you have been able to do that. With the rapid and massive influx of illicit fentanyl, cartels are driving addiction and creating repeat users due to its high potency and addictive nature. This is the Mexican cartel's #1 goal, and their business model is working. So we need to have a nimble and comprehensive response to this clear and present danger, because the new drug landscape is nothing like what it used to be. So we need to change with the times. We need a COVID-like response to combat this crisis. Harm reduction is about saving lives, and we need to meet people where they're at. Harm reduction is all around us, from seatbelts to sunscreen or bike helmets. And everybody is always for those things that will save a life. So why would we not extend that desire to save a life in the form of fentanyl testing strips? Legalizing fentanyl testing strips will not only save lives by preventing overdose, but can also help connect people who use drugs with other services and resources they may need, including treatment to help them quit and keep them alive. That's all I have.
All right. Thank you, Libby. We now have Brandy Harris, a private citizen, who's going to testify. Welcome to the committee, Brandy.
Thank you, Chairman, and the members of this committee for allowing me to speak. My name is Brandy Harris, and I am not a medical professional. I do not have statistics for you. I am a mother. My son's name was Sebastian. On April 15th, 2022, Sebastian's life was cut short because he relapsed. He was 21 years old. When Sebastian was about 13 years old, he was riding his bike to football practice when a truck came down the road and hit him head-on. As a result of the injuries that he sustained from this accident when he was only 13 years old, he was put on pain medication. That is where his addiction started. It didn't progress immediately, but that is where his liking for it took off. The next few years, while he was still a teenager, were rather rocky. But right about the time that Sebastian turned 18, he really started to turn his life around, and he went to rehab and graduated high school with honors. And he was holding a good job. He had a wonderful girlfriend whom he shared a home with. He had numerous pets, and he was just very loving and caring to everybody around him. His little sister was born with a chromosomal abnormality, and so she had hundreds of hospital stays throughout her life. I don't mean that to sound like she's passed away. She's not, she's still here. So, but the first 6 years of her life were in and out of the hospital a lot. And Sebastian's main focus was his little sister, Nin. And he, without provocation at all, had set up a GoFundMe to help me with her medical expenses. And that's just the type of person that Sebastian was. He cared about everybody, and he was always putting everybody before himself. For some reason, on April 15th of this last year, 2022, he decided to relapse. We have absolutely no known reason why, but he did. The substance that Sebastian purchased was tainted with fentanyl. He did not think he was getting fentanyl. He thought he was getting opioids. And so Sebastian's hope to be able to fully recover, to have a short relapse, was denied him because there was something in his substance that he didn't know was in there. I believe that if fentanyl testing strips were legal, then they would give everybody access to test what's in there. Schools, police officers, doctors, all them, you know, the grandmas that switch pain pills with each other. There's fentanyl in everything right now. And so I feel like fentanyl testing strips, if they weren't illegal, would be just another tool in our toolbox to help with this opioid pandemic. I thank you very much for taking your time to listen to me today. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them.
Thank you, Brandy. We have written proponent testimony from Representative Jason Probst, Tim DeWeese, Director of Johnson County Mental Health, Chrissy Meyer, Chief Community-Based Service Officer of DCCA, Lisa Vaida, a pharmacist and health economist, Brandon Johnson, a City Council member of the City of Wichita, and Seth Dewey, a private citizen. I show no neutral or opponent testimony, so is there anybody that has proponent testimony that would like to speak? All right, let's go to questions committee. We have questions for the proponents of this bill. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do note the presence of the testimony of my former constituent, Ms. Vaeda, and I certainly commend her wise testimony everyone's reading. She was involved in the Narcan legalization efforts, and she's very knowledgeable on the topic. That being said, I have questions for Ms. Holliday, I believe it is. Erica? I missed a little bit of your testimony. How long have you been involved in working with people with these types of substance abuse disorders?
Yeah, since 2015.
Okay. And I take it that's your full-time job? That's what you do?
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Okay. We had some testimony earlier this week regarding fentanyl from some people in law enforcement who related to us what I sometimes think may be an urban legend, but I may be wrong, that marijuana dealers are lacing marijuana with fentanyl in an attempt to addict people to the marijuana, I think is the theory. Are you seeing that in your practice? Is that happening?
So I wouldn't say it's as common as seeing fentanyl with heroin or meth, but I have seen from the same overdose that gave me the increased data. I've seen cases of overdose happening when they tested what was in their system, both marijuana and fentanyl showed up. I don't know if that means...
That means it's just concomitant in the system. It doesn't necessarily mean that the marijuana was the source of the fentanyl.
Sure. So in my field, I've heard that that can happen, that there has been marijuana laced with fentanyl, but I don't think that is the major cause of this crisis. I think it's just, you know, but it's not impossible either.
Right. And I'm trying to figure out in part, and maybe this is beyond the scope of your expertise, but what would be the economic incentive for someone in the drug business to take something called fentanyl, which you can use in combination with others and is addictive in nature? I'm trying to figure out what the economic incentive is for your neighborhood dealer to put fentanyl in marijuana. Is there anything you know of that can help us understand why that might happen?
I think for folks who have a brain more prone to substance use disorder, when fentanyl enters into their system in any capacity, it is so strong, as it was mentioned, 50 to 100 times the amount of morphine, heroin, that it's hard to. It almost immediately changes the brain, and so once they start having it, their brain thinks, oh, this feels good, and now I want more of this, and that's all I'm going to think about. When someone takes something like, marijuana, for example, it's not an opioid, kind of a different situation. That voice of like, this is good, I kind of want more of this, is probably still taking place, but it is not as loud, it is not as powerful as what happens when fentanyl enters the brain. So I would say the economic benefit is once someone starts taking fentanyl, whether it's their first time, whether it's, after a couple of times, they're going to want more of it pretty consistently, and they're not going to be able to stop because their brain isn't giving them the power to. So if they weren't taking it before, that wouldn't be so much of an issue. And especially now they know, well, this is the guy I got it from, this is the dealer that can help me out there.
Okay, I follow that. Mr. Chair, with your permission, a second area of inquiry. I'm looking here on the internet, and it says that the Walmart Topeka Super Center for $35 will sell me 12 test strips in a bottle that tests for marijuana, cocaine, opiates, methamphetamines, ecstasy, amphetamines, and something called phencyclidine, which I'm not familiar with, as well as licit prescription drugs, including tricyclic antidepressants, barbiturates, benzodiazepines, methadone, and oxycodone. Can you, based on your experience, think of any reason why it would make sense that I can go down to Walmart and I can buy a test for $35 that lets me test for 7 different illicit drugs and 5 more commonly abused prescription drugs, but that it should be a felony for me to get a test strip that would also test for the presence of fentanyl?
So you're asking why these test strips are legal and fentanyl test strips aren't?
Well, sure, that's a good rephrasing of it. Is there some historical or science? It takes me a long time to ask a simple question.
No,
I get
it's
paid by the hour. I'm a lawyer.
We know.
But to be serious about this, because it is a serious problem, can you identify for us a historical or a scientific reason why it would make sense to let people buy test strips for 7 illicit drugs and 5 commonly abused prescription drugs, but not for fentanyl?
In my own opinion, I think that, well, it doesn't make sense. Short answer, they should both be legal. As well as, I mean, I don't know. I heard you say the umbrella phrase of opioids. I didn't hear you say fentanyl on that list, so presuming they don't test for it. Fentanyl right now is very much associated with folks who are doing pretty illicit substances, heroin, meth, cocaine, etc. There's quite a big amount of stigma towards this population, and I think oftentimes people they're not the folks that always get their rights fought for. Maybe that's simplistically, it's not exactly a historical answer, but I think history also supports this sort of reality. And so my guess is that they're not legal because, I don't know, we're sort of new in this area. Maybe someone can answer it better.
Erica, you don't have to answer that question. He likes to ask rhetorical questions sometimes too.
I mean,
what
I'm trying to say,
I do understand what you're saying, and I appreciate your perspective, though, because I think it is an important one. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly. Representative Butler?
I'm not sure who this would go to, but first, thank you for your testimonies. Those are important for people to hear. One of the things that, as I talked to people before, and I just asked this question of a sheriff in one of the counties in my district, is there any concern using the strips? And I'm for it, but I want to make sure, is there any concern in using the strips that people would become exposed in the use of the strips inadvertently? And is there a fear of that?
Give my answer briefly. No, the amount of and again, we're not usually testing you usually put whatever drug it is, it's a very, very, very small amount that the strip needs. We're talking, yeah, like picture a COVID rapid test, that tiny little strip on there. That's about the size of a fentanyl test strip. And you can't really, the way that they're testing it, generally it's got it's like a dip situation or maybe a dropper if you have one. So even if it gets on the skin, it's not, you can't overdose if you get it. It's not ingested dermally, if that makes sense. So no, it's not really a risk there, but that's a good question.
Further questions, committee? All right, seeing none, thank you very much. It was brought to my attention that we possibly have someone from KDHE that would like to testify that's here in the room. If you would, just state your name and title for us.
Yeah, thank you. So Ashley Goss, Deputy Secretary, Kansas Department of Health and Environment. We are finding out why you don't have our testimony at the very moment, but thank you for allowing me to testify. So Chairman Owens, a member of the committee, I'm actually here to testify on behalf of KDHE and KDADS, the Kansas Department of Aging and Disability Services. We stand in support of this bill to legalize the fentanyl testing strips. Just to give you some statistics, the Kansas Vital Statistics has reported 678 drug overdose deaths in Kansas in 2021. That's a 42% increase from 2020. The increase in Kansans dying from overdose has largely been driven by the deaths involving potent synthetic opioids like fentanyl. Please note, and when we are getting the overdose deaths, we cannot just pull out fentanyl. It's a synthetic drug, but it's classified as an opioid death. 4 out of 5 opioid-related drug deaths among Kansas in 2021 fentanyl was determined to be involved in those. The increase in overdose deaths reporting, involving synthetic drugs over the past 10 years in Kansas has seen nearly an 800% increase. As you've heard, unfortunately, from those before me, fentanyl is killing our kids, parents, neighbors, and our friends. In response to the surge for fentanyl deaths, as someone else covered, we would ask not only for the strips to be legalized for fentanyl, but also for the other 2 drugs known as the date rape drugs. Fentanyl is a highly potent drug, as you've heard, commonly adulterated to other drugs, highly addictive, 50 times more potent than heroin, 100 times more potent than morphine. It's tasteless and impossible to identify without testing. Small amounts, as you've heard, can be lethal. Most recent cases of fentanyl-related overdoses are linked illicitly to manufactured fentanyl distributed through illegal drug markets, again, as you've heard. Fentanyl is often added to heroin, but also found in counterfeit pressed tablets that resemble prescription opioids or anxiety meds and even eye drops. And again, as you've heard, most people are not even aware that they're there. There are other states who've gone before us who have legalized fentanyl strips. Just in this session, last year's session alone, there were 10 other states who legalized this. Texas is also in the process in this legislative year in legalizing fentanyl strips as well. I do want to point out there is so far no funding in either budget at KDHE or KDADS for the fentanyl testing strips. However, should they become legalized, KDADS can apply for funding to obtain these. KDHE cannot. We can work on the prevention side. KDADS can work on the treatment side or in this case, the testing strips. We both have a very large network of community partners and providers that we could help in distributing fentanyl testing strips. As someone pointed out earlier, you can actually go onto Amazon. I tried this earlier. You can put testing strips in your cart. However, because I have a Kansas address, it does state you cannot have these shipped here. So they are readily available. You can buy 5 for just under $30. Specifically on Amazon, there's another site that we've identified. You can buy them for $1 a piece. In closing, KDADS and KDHE supports House Bill 2328 to help reduce the overdose death in Kansas. With your support, we can use harm reduction tools such as these strips to engage people who use drugs in the SUD treatment and help reduce the cost to Kansas families. I might also make you aware that previously, or at the same time as your hearing was going on, we had another hearing on the House side, House Health. It was a bill that we introduced or worked with KDADS to write. It's a little bit different than this. Not only is it asking to legalize fentanyl testing strips, it also talks about establishing an opioid review committee. We do this now. We have an MMRC committee, maternal mortality review committee. So in this committee, it would look specifically at opioid deaths and the cause and things leading up to that. And then we are also amending the Good Samaritan law so that Narcan can be administered by anybody who rolls up on someone that could be suffering from an opioid overdose without having any ill effects from helping the person that is suffering at that time. I can answer any questions. Thank you for allowing me to testify.
Absolutely, thank you. And if you would just get a copy of your testimony over to our committee assistant, Colette, that would be great.
We'll do that.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I am aware of the other committee. We certainly didn't plan it that way, but it worked out well because we were able to have great folks here to testify in both committees. As many of you know, this is a topic that has come up many times, has met resistance in different ways, and so our goal is within the House to try to approach it from a couple different perspectives. So, all right, committee, were there any further questions on House Bill 2328? Yeah, Representative Carmichael.
Two matters briefly. The illicit medication, or excuse me, the illicit drug that I referred to, phencyclidine, is commonly known as PCP, just so we understand. And second, I think the criticisms in today's reflector of particularly our chairs and our committees for holding two hearings on this topic are unjustified, and I appreciate the chair's willingness to hear this matter, and I think it's good that we're also holding hearings on the same day for everyone's convenience to deal with this problem. Thank you.
Representative Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for another opportunity to ask a question. For the KDHE, I just had a question. Do you foresee in the future that with the purchase, with approval of this, that with the purchase with funding available, that it would be made available for users to maybe just be able to get free so that they would have that supply? Was that kind of what you were, when you were talking about, I don't know if that's what you were alluding to or not, I just want to make sure.
So Andy with KDADS has showed up just in time to answer that question, as they would be the ones to receive the funding. So I'll let him address that.
Yeah, Andy, if you would just, your name and your title, please.
Andy Brown, I'm the Commissioner for Behavioral Health Services at KDADS. And so there was a little bit of a misspeak earlier when Ashley was giving testimony. We actually already have federal funding available that we can use to purchase test strips and distribute those. We're just not allowed to under current Kansas law. And so that's certainly something that we would step up and do. Additionally, we do have the opportunity to apply for additional grants through SAMHSA for that purpose. So some of the funding we have now we can use for that purpose, and we have the opportunity to apply for more.
Very good. Does that answer your question?
I'm not quite sure. So I see the funding's there, or there may be more available. But I guess the question is it going to be made readily available for users or even a family member to be able to pick those up for at no cost, possibly?
Yeah. So currently, with naloxone, our naloxone distribution program, we work with DECA, which is a substance use treatment agency in the state that operates statewide and allows for anyone in Kansas to request naloxone free of charge and have that shipped to them. We would use probably a similar method where we would do distribution in that way. I think we also hope that it'll be available at corner drugstores and all across the state for people just to walk in and purchase. I think it's already been testified to the fact that these are not expensive. They're about $1 a strip roughly. And so it's not a significant barrier, but we do intend to make some available to the public for free.
All right. Additional questions, committee? All right. Seeing none, thank you very much. All right, committee. We are going to close the hearing on House Bill 2020 or 2328, and we're going to move into trying to work a couple of bills here. Let's see, let's do final action on House Bill 2329. Natalie, if you'll give us an overview, that would be appreciated.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2329 increases the additional prison time for the special sentencing rule that's related to possessing or carrying a firearm during the commission of a drug felony.
Very good. Committee, any questions for Natalie? All right. Are there any amendments or discussions as it relates to House Bill 2329? Representative Eric Smith. Any discussion? Representative Smith deferred. Representative Titus.
I'd ask thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd ask the question at hearing about data to back up the increased sentencing. And to that end, it was, the proponents admitted it was difficult to quantify. I had some conversations afterwards that suggest there may be some information at the federal level that does indicate this is effective in some cases, but that was just an anecdotal conversation. Without some harder numbers, my biggest concern is that the length isn't right without knowing more. So I'll be voting against this bill.
Further discussion, committee. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't sure whether there might have been some attempt to amend this bill to perhaps accomplish some additional good purposes. But if I recall the bill correctly, it imposes enhanced penalties for possession of a firearm at the same time as possession of, I think it's virtually any quantity of a controlled substance. Could I inquire of the reviser, the chair, or someone if I'm remembering the bill correctly in that regard?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, this bill essentially imposes additional prison time for a person who possesses a firearm during the commission of a drug felony. This special rule already exists. I don't know how often it's being used, but it does already exist. This just increases the additional time from 6 to 36 months for mere possession of the firearm and from 18 to 60 months if the firearm is discharged. However, the rule does not apply to a violation of KSA 215706, which is possession of a controlled substance. So if it's just possession, then this sentencing rule would not apply in those circumstances.
If I might follow up, though, cultivation of 5 plants, as I sometimes hear described by Mr. Reinecker, I believe it is, that would qualify for this increased penalty as an example?
Mr. Chairman, yes, cultivation, distribution, manufacture, those would all be included.
Okay. This bill, Mr. Chairman, is certainly not as bad as it could be. But as the representative from, is it Manhattan or Wamego?
Manhattan.
Okay, I remember your predecessor well, one of my better friends. I think he would say the same. But I just can't see that there's demonstrated efficacy here. It will take up beds in the jailhouse. I mean, if we really want to do something about transactional related drug crimes, i.e. enforcement of contracts at the point of a gun, the first thing we ought to do is legalize and regulate adult use marijuana, and that would accomplish a lot more than punitive legislation that has no demonstrated efficacy. So I will not be supporting this particular bill. Thank you.
Additional questions or discussion? Committee. All right. Do I see a motion as it relates to House Bill 2329? Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll make the motion to move the bill out of the committee favorably.
Very good. Do I have a second? Representative Russman has a second. Further discussion, committee. All in favor of moving House Bill 2329 out favorably, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. This is passed out favorably. Those wishing to be recorded in the no is Slingensiepen, Heiberger, Martinez, and Carmichael. All right, committee, last one for the day is House Bill 2398. And could we have a revisor overview of that one, Natalie?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2398 adds the placing of controlled substances into a pill or capsule form into the definition of manufacture. It also increases the criminal penalties for manufacturing fentanyl, and it creates a special sentencing rule to make sentences for distributing fentanyl presumptive imprisonment and twice the maximum length.
All right, committee, discussion or amendments as it relates to House Bill 2398. Well, I do have a motion that I would like to make because I believe that we could make this a little bit more possibly enticing on the Senate side if we were to amend in House Bill 2328 into House Bill 2398. 2328 is the bill that we just heard about the legalizing of the test strips for fentanyl and for the other drugs. And I think it pairs very well with the enhanced penalties as it relates to fentanyl. And so with that, I would move my motion. Do I have a second on that? Representative Titus is the second. Committee discussions on that. Representative Carmichael.
With the chair's leave, could I ask the reviser to refresh my recollection one more time about the penalty provisions here as it relates to manufacture of pills, et cetera? Help me remember exactly what we're doing here.
Representative Carmichael, we're on the motion to amend it in. We can ask that question after we finish this motion when we're amending it.
I certainly will defer to your suggestion, but in trying to reach compromise here, it would have been helpful for me to fully understand what is being put together. But if you want me to wait, I'll wait. That's okay. I can vote yes on this amendment without knowing the rest of the bill.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Any further discussion on that amendment? All right. Seeing none, I close on my amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. All right. Representative Carmichael. Oh, we gotta record our votes. Representative Carmichael, Representative Schlingen-Siepen, Heiberger, Martinez. You gonna stay out of that one? All right, we'll add Martinez in there after all. All right, very good. Now, Representative Carmichael, your question.
Okay. With the chair's leave, could the reviser refresh me as to what we're doing by way of penalties and again, exactly what it is we're proscribing in the base bill?
Mr. Chairman, so I feel like it's maybe easier to think about the base bill doing two separate things. The first thing is changing the definition of what constitutes manufacturing a controlled substance. And to that end, we're adding placing into pill or capsule form. Now, that would meet the definition of manufacturing a controlled substance, any controlled substance. And then the other provisions in the bill relate to the distribution and criminal penalties for drugs involving fentanyl. So we are increasing the, well, first we're defining what a fentanyl-related controlled substance is, and then we are increasing the penalty for a violation of KSA 215703, which is manufacturing a controlled substance, when that person is manufacturing fentanyl. And then we're creating a special sentencing rule that would double the maximum sentence and make that presumptive prison in the event that they are manufacturing fentanyl.
Thank you very much, Madam Reviser, and thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair. I now understand what we're voting on.
Thank you very much. All right, committee. Further discussion or amendments on House Bill 2398 as amended? Do I have a motion as it relates to House Bill 2398 as amended? Representative Eric Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we pass this out favorably as amended.
All right, thank you. Do I have a second? Representative Thompson, saw his finger first. Representative Thompson is our second. Further discussion, committee? All right, all in favor of passing out House Bill 2398 as amended, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. Wishing to be recorded as ayes, Schlingen-Siepen, Heiberger, Martinez, Carmichael. All right, committee, that completes our full day today. You will see an amended agenda coming out. Our bill hearing for tomorrow was canceled to a lack of testimony, but we will still be back to work a few bills tomorrow. So until then, we'll be adjourned.